break down 6 players that are set to go absolutely nuclear here in week 3 of the fantasy season. These players have way too good of matchups to ignore. Their upside is way too high for you guys to not have them in your starting lineups. These are the players that are going to help you guys absolutely dominate your league mates here in week 3 of the season. Let's kick the video off with Odunze of the Chicago Bears, a player coming in as the wide receiver 3 right now in fantasy football, finishing with 31.8 fantasy points in week 2, 11 targets, 7 catches, 128 receiving yards, and 2 receiving touchdowns after having 15.7 fantasy points in week 1 and a receiving touchdown as well in that matchup. Now he goes into week 3 at home against a Dallas Cowboys defense, giving up the 30th most fantasy points to the wide receiver position on the season. This is a defense that just got absolutely sliced and diced by Russell Wilson, Malik Neighbors, and Rondell Robinson of the New York Giants. And I get that the Bears have been a bit bumpy to start their season offensively, but Caleb Williams has still thrown for over 200 yards in each of the first 2 games and at least 1 touchdown in each of the first 2 games. And the point being here is that both the Cowboys and the Bears defenses overall going into week 3 have played absolutely awful across the board. I'm expecting a lot of points in this matchup. I'm expecting a lot of fantasy points scored in this matchup. And right now, Odunze is the wide receiver to own when it comes to the Chicago Bears. It hasn't been DJ Moore, hasn't been a guy like Luther Burden or a tight end like Colston Loveland. It's been all Odunze through the first 2 games of the season as he leads this team in total targets with 20 total targets. Compare that to DJ Moore, who's sitting at 11 targets. That's literally what Odunze had in last week's game alone. Smash spot for Odunze. Love this matchup across the board for most players included. Going into week 3, outside of CeeDee Lamb in this matchup, I'm expecting Odunze to have the most total upside. And you guys are already, starting CeeDee Lamb no matter what. This is the wide receiver 5 in fantasy points per game right now. He is lighting it up. You're feeling great if you spent a later round selection on Odunze, and you're also going to feel great if he's in your starting lineup here in week 3 because he is set to absolutely pop off. And you may have guessed it, but I'm headed straight to Underdog to take the over on Odunze's total receiving yards, currently sitting at 63.5 receiving yards. This is a smash line for you guys to take, and don't forget, all new users who sign up on Underdog using promo code THECATCH, that link is down below, are going to get a free NFL Pick'em to use towards week 3 NFL action. Take that free Pick'em, take the over on Odunze's receiving yards, and if both of those lines hit, you'll automatically double your cash entry. And on top of that, all new users who sign up on Underdog using promo code THECATCH are also going to get an exclusive offer. Once you play through $5 on Underdog, they're going to give you $50 to use in bonus cash towards week 3 NFL action. And on top of that, you're also going to receive a 50% deposit match up to $1,000. So make sure you guys sign up on Underdog using promo code THECATCH if you guys want to take advantage of all of their week 3 exclusive NFL offers. Sticking with that same matchup, like I said, I love this matchup across the board. I want to talk about Javonte Williams, running back for the Dallas Cowboys, coming off of a week 2 performance where he had 25 fantasy points, 97 yards on the ground, a touchdown, and 6 catches for 33 receiving yards against the Giants. And don't forget, in week 1 against a good Eagles defense, he also had over 20 fantasy points and 2 rushing touchdowns. This is the RB2 in fantasy football right now. Talk about, you're happy if you spend a later round pick on Odunze. You're ecstatic if you drafted Javonte Williams as your RB4 or 5 or whatever it was in your drafts in the later rounds. He is going into this matchup once again a smash spot. The Bears have given up the 29th most fantasy points to the running back position on the season thus far. He is the RB3 in fantasy points per game right now. And ultimately, I do expect this to be a game where more is done through the air. But I mean, you look even the last week, right, between the Giants and Cowboys, more is done through the air. I would argue in that game overall. And he still had 25 fantasy points. And this is an absolute smash spot. Be a little bit tougher for Javonte next week, home against Green Bay. But here in week 3, he's an absolute must-start player. I know we're all a little surprised here at the success that the Cowboys run game has had early in the season, but just keep rolling with it as long as the hot hand is there. Once again, love this matchup. We want to start a lot of players in this matchup overall, but Javonte Williams should be a lock and loaded must-start running back for your guys' roster. Even if you have to slide him into the flex or play him as an RB2, you got to get him in your starting lineup here in week 3. He could go absolutely nuclear. Next up, let's take a look at Zay Flowers going into a Monday Night Football matchup against the Detroit Lions after having 14.9 fantasy points in week 2. 11 targets, 7 catches, 75 receiving yards, and had a very big game in week 1 against Buffalo, 28.1 fantasy points total so far on the season. This is your wide receiver 6 overall and the wide receiver 7 in fantasy points per game thus far on the season. I don't think that pace is going to slow down whatsoever in week 3. Once again, a good matchup as the Lions secondary has given up the 24th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers thus far on the season. And this is one of those matchups where once again, I'm expecting points scored, fireworks across the board. We got a primetime matchup between arguably two of the very best teams in the NFL, even if the Lions started off a little slow week 1. You know that this is going to be a great matchup overall for fantasy, and we want to start a lot of players in this matchup at the end of the day. But Zay Flowers, once again, a player who kind of fell back during draft season and wasn't really viewed as like a high upside type player, and he will have, lower ceiling weeks, I'm sure, throughout the course of the season. But I don't think that's going to be the case in week 3. And I know, at least, looking at last week and a tad bit in week 1, we have seen other wide receivers on this team, such as DeAndre Hopkins and even Devontae Walker in his second year, and Tylan Wallace. I mean, some guys we really weren't expecting to be huge contributors, and actually not a lot of Rashad Bateman or Mark Andrews as of late, but still, this is the clear-cut number 1 pass catcher on this team. They're going to try and run the football first. I get all that, but Zay Flowers in a very good spot here. A lot of people think of this Lions defense as like a good defense, and they defend the tight end position well. They've been pretty good against the run under Dan Campbell's regime in recent years, but so far on the season, they've been pretty weak overall, especially against the wide receiver position. So this is still a great spot. Good primetime matchup here on Monday Night Football between two very good teams that can put up points. Zay Flowers should be absolutely locked into your guys' starting lineups. Could have a very big week here in week 3. Except let's talk about Jordan Mason of the Minnesota Vikings going into week 3. After 2 poor performances, 8.5 points in week 1, 5.8 in week 2, but he's going into week 3 as the clear-cut RB1 for the Vikings, as Aaron Jones is set to miss a couple weeks dealing with a hamstring injury. And listen, I will go ahead and address things first and foremost that, people aren't maybe exactly bullish on this offense at the moment because, JJ McCarthy has looked pretty awful for majority of the season outside of 1.5 quarters in the first week. But he's hurt. It doesn't even matter, right? Carson Wentz is a starting quarterback here. This Vikings offense has definitely looked relatively anemic, to say the least, to start the season. But you got to like this spot for Jordan Mason going in as the running back here who's going to see all of the volume. I know we got some other names like Xavier Scott, Cam Akers got some. We know Jordan Mason is going to see a majority, if not all of the snaps in this matchup, and it is a smash matchup at home for the Vikings against this Bengals defense, giving up the 31st most fantasy points to the running back position, second worst in the league. And at least in week 1, in a good matchup against the Bears, Jordan Mason averaged 4.5 yards per carry. If you guys watched that game, he looked really good with the football in his hands. But week 2, that Falcons front 7 has looked absolutely stout, especially in that second matchup here in the season. So listen, this one's a little bit riskier, but I got to try and think outside the box. Don't want to just name, obvious must-start players for you guys. I think Jordan Mason in a very, very good spot with no Aaron Jones here in this week 3 matchup. I think he is a player you guys should strongly consider in your starting lineups, who I'm not going to be surprised whatsoever if he pops off this week, even if this offense is slowed down to a degree due to probably what's going to be poor quarterback play out of Carson Wentz. I think they're going to rely on the run game first and foremost. And let's face it, they could be in some short yardage situations in this game as well, but Joe Burrow out on the opposite team, also missing their starting quarterback, and Jake Browning playing at the quarterback position as he just threw a few interceptions this past week. So I won't be surprised if both teams see some short yardage situations, but nonetheless, good for Jordan Mason. I think he's going to be a very good start for you guys here in week 3. We had Emeka Egbuka in last week's video and in week 1's video. He didn't exactly boom in week 2 like he did in week 1, but he still scored, had 12.9 fantasy points, and he still is looking very solid through the first 2 weeks of the season as the wide receiver 7 overall in fantasy scoring and the wide receiver 6 in fantasy points per game thus far on the season. Here at home, the Bucs' first home game of the season so far, going to face the New York Jets, which, I mean, this defense wasn't great last year. They certainly haven't been great so far on the season, but they're ranking okay against the wide receiver position right in the middle. But what I want to kind of point out here that I think is going to work to Egbuka's advantage once again in week 3 is the fact that the number 1 corner on the Jets, Sauce Gardner, is going to be playing, presumably shadowing Mike Evans in this matchup, right? And look through the first 3 weeks. Week 1, A.J. Terrell on Mike Evans. Week 2, Derek Stingley. Now week 3, Sauce Gardner. I mean, week 4, they get Philly. Week 5, they get Seattle. They have some tough number 1 corner matchups, but they have to take Mike Evans, right? And that has worked in Emeka Egbuka's favor. He's had 6 or more targets in each of the first 2 games, averaging 23.6 fantasy points per game with 3 touchdowns in that stretch as well. And I think once again, in week 3, it's going to work to his favor once again. I do think that the Buccaneers are going to be able to run the football a little bit more efficiently against the Jets than they were, against the front sevens of the Falcons and the Texans, as the Jets have been poor against the running back position. But I still think Emeka Egbuka, very safe floor, and has the potential once again to have a really big week, because outside of Sauce Gardner, I don't really have any concerns in terms of this Jets secondary. And ultimately, once again, I do think that this is going to be a matchup where we see a lot of points scored, fantasy points scored. I think that the Bucs, they've played well, but they've kind of slid through these first 2 victories, closer games. I think this could be a game where, first game at home, they pull away a little bit sooner rather than later and put up some good offensive points across the board. So Emeka Egbuka, a very strong flex option for you guys this week, and a player who I think you guys should absolutely have full faith in, that he has the ability to absolutely explode here in week 3. All right, to wrap up the video, we're going to talk about a tight end. That's Juwan Johnson, the New Orleans Saints, coming off of a week 2 performance where he had 15.9 fantasy points, 9 targets, 5 grabs, 49 receiving yards, and a touchdown. Currently, this is your tight end 3 in fantasy, your tight end 2 in fantasy points per game thus far on the season. Spencer Rattler, first of all, has not been as bad as advertised at the quarterback position, and second of all, really likes to target Juwan Johnson. At least that's what we've seen through the first 2 weeks of the season. And I don't think that's going to change whatsoever in week 3 on the road here against a good Seahawks defense. Don't get me wrong, but this is still a Seahawks defense that has allowed the most fantasy points to the tight end position so far on the season. This is a smash spot for Juwan Johnson. And once again, I do think that Spencer Rattler is going to be forced to throw the football here in week 3. And ultimately, the Saints have thrown the football 34 or more times in each of the first 2 games, and they are throwing the football a lot. I mean, don't forget, this is now a Kellen Moore offense, a very different offense than what we saw last year. This is the offense that the Eagles ran that got them to the Super Bowl last year, right? So they're doing things very differently under head coach Kellen Moore, and that is working to the favor of Juwan Johnson, and fortunately giving us a safe floor if you own Chris Olave or Rashid Shaheed as well this season. But nonetheless, Juwan Johnson, a player who's getting higher and higher in terms of roster percentage. But at the time I'm recording this, he still only sits at 53% rostered. This is a player to go out and grab that you guys can potentially play in the flex if you're struggling, if you're dealing with injuries, but especially if you guys are having issues at the tight end position. This is a player that could have an absolutely nuclear week in week 3 due to this matchup. He's had 15.6 or more fantasy points in each of the first 2 games. He could have his best fantasy day yet. Even on the road here, I'm not worried about it. I know this is still a good Seahawks defense, but they have not been good against the tight end position. I think that early and often throughout this game, Spencer Rattler is going to be looking to target Juwan Johnson, and he is going to have a huge day here in week 3. There you guys have it. There are my 6 players that are set to go absolutely nuclear here in week 3 of the fantasy season. Don't forget, guys, I'll answer all fantasy football questions in the comment section down below. If you guys need anything whatsoever as we approach week 3 of the season, be sure to drop me a comment. I'll answer as many as I can throughout the course of the week. And while you're down there, it does me a huge favor if you guys hit that subscribe button on the way out. And this is all we do here all year long: free fantasy football content, redraft, dynasty, and best ball. So be sure to subscribe on the way out. And when the playlists and videos pop up on the screen, whenever they do, go check out all of our other videos for week 3 of the season. We'll have everything you could possibly need to absolutely dominate this week of the fantasy season and every week to come this year as well. And with that, I'll say thank you guys so much for watching and or listening. And remember, you saw it here on The Catch.